Destroy all flesh. Why flesh in particular? Who was this lord of flesh? After all, how big was the flood? Perhaps a few dryads and fauns had just run into the hills, and the farther valleys and woods frightened. But most had gone on blithely unaware of any flood at all, unless the nymphs should tell them. It pleased Ursula to think of the naiads in Asia Minor meeting the Nereids at the mouth of the streams, where the sea washed against the fresh, sweet tide, and calling to their sisters the news of Noah's flood. They would tell amusing accounts of Noah in his ark. Some nymphs would relate how they had hung on the side of the ark, peeped in, and heard Noah and Shem and Ham and Japheth, sitting in their place under the rain, saying how they four were the only men on earth now, because the Lord had drowned all the rest, so that they four would have everything to themselves, and be masters of everything, subtenants under the thing, subtenants under the great proprietor. Ursula wished she had been a nymph. She would have laughed through the window of the ark, and flicked drops of flood at Noah, before she drifted away to people who were less important in their proprietor and their flood. What was God, after all? If maggots in a dead dog be but God kissing carrion, what then is not God? She was surfeited of this God. She was weary of the Ursula Brangwen who felt troubled about God. Whatever God was, he was, and there was no need for her to trouble about him. She felt she had now all licence. Skrebensky sat beside her, listening to the sermon, to the voice of law and order. The very hairs of your head are all numbered. He did not believe it. He believed his own things were quite at his own disposal. You could do as you liked with your own things, so long as you left other people's alone. Ursula caressed him and made love to him. Nevertheless, and to destroy his being. She was not with him, she was against him. But her making love to him, her complete admiration of him, in open life, gratified him. She caught him out of himself, and they were lovers, in a young, romantic, almost fantastic way. He gave her a little ring. They put it in Rhine wine, in their glass, and she drank, then he drank. They drank till the ring lay exposed at the bottom of the glass. Then she took the simple jewel, and tied it on a thread round her neck, where she wore it. He asked her for a photograph when he was going away. She went in great excitement to the photographer, with 5 shillings. The result was an ugly little picture of herself with her mouth on one side. She wondered over it, and admired it. He saw only the live face of the girl. The picture hurt him. He kept it. He always remembered it, but he could scarcely bear to see it. There was a hurt to his soul, in the clear, fearless face that was touched with abstraction. Its abstraction was certainly away from him. Then war was declared with the Boers in South Africa, and everywhere was a fizz of excitement. He wrote that he might have to go, and he sent her a box of sweets. She was slightly dazed at the thought of his going to war, not knowing how to feel. It was a sort of romantic situation that she knew so well in fiction, she hardly understood it in fact. Underneath a top elation was a sort of dreariness, deep, ashy disappointment. However, she secreted the sweets under her bed, and ate them all herself, when she went to bed and when she woke in the morning. All the time she felt very guilty and ashamed, but she simply did not want to share them. That box of sweets remained stuck in her mind afterwards. Why had she secreted them and eaten every one? Why? She did not feel guilty. She only knew she ought to feel guilty. And she could not make up guilty. She only knew she ought to feel guilty. And she could not make up her mind. Curiously monumental that box of sweets stood up, now it was empty. It was a crux for her. What was she to think of it? The idea of war altogether made her feel uneasy. When men began organised fighting with each other, it seemed to her as if the poles of the universe were cracking, and the whole might go tumbling into the bottomless pit. A horrible bottomless feeling she had. Yet of course there was the minted superscription of romance and honour and even religion about war. She was very confused. Skrebensky was busy. He could not come to see her. She asked for no assurance, no security. What was between them was, and could not be altered by avowals. She knew that by instinct. She trusted to the intrinsic reality. But she felt an agony of helplessness. She could do nothing. Vaguely she knew the huge powers of the world rolling and crashing together, darkly, clumsily, stupidly, yet colossal, so that one was brushed along almost as dust, helpless, helpless, swirling like dust. Yet she wanted so hard to rebel, to rage, to fight. But with what? Could she, with her hands, fight the face of the earth, beat the hills in their places? Yet her breast wanted to fight the whole world, and these two small hands were all she had to do it with. The months went by, and it was Christmas. The snowdrops came. There was a little hollow in the wood near Cossethay, where snowdrops grew wild. She sent him some in a box, and he wrote her a quick little note of thanks. Very grateful and wistful he seemed. Her eyes grew childlike and puzzled. Puzzled from day to day she went on, helpless, carried along by all that must happen. He went about at his duties, giving at the bottom of his heart his self, the soul that aspired and had true hope of self-effectuation, lay as dead, stillborn, a dead weight in his womb. Who was he to hold important his personal connection? What did a man matter personally? He was just a brick in the whole great social fabric, the nation, the modern humanity. His personal movements were small and entirely subsidiary. The whole form must be ensured, not ruptured, for any personal reason whatsoever, since no personal reason could justify such a breaking. What did personal intimacy matter? One had to fill one's place in the whole, the great scheme of man's elaborate civilization, that was all. The whole mattered, but the unit, the person, had no importance, except as he represented the whole. So Skrebensky left the girl out and went his way, serving what he had to serve, and enduring what he had to endure. To his own intrinsic life he was dead, and he could not rise again from the dead. His soul lay in the tomb. His life lay in the established order of things. He had his five senses too. They were to be gratified. Apart from this, he represented the great, established, extant idea of life, and as this he was important and beyond question. The good of the greatest number was all that mattered. That which was the greatest good for them all, collectively, was the greatest good for the individual. And so, every man must give himself to support the state, and so labour for the greatest good of all. One might make improvements in the state, perhaps, but always with a view to preserving it intact. No highest good of the community, however, would give him the vital fulfilment of his soul. He knew this, but he did not consider the soul of the individual sufficiently important. He believed a man was important insofar as he represented all humanity. He could not see it. It was not born in him to see that the highest good of the community as it stands is no longer the highest good of even the average individual. He thought that because the community represents millions of people, therefore it must be millions of times more important than any individual, forgetting that the community is an abstraction from the many, and is not the many themselves. Now when the statement of the abstract good for the community has become a formula, lacking in all inspiration or value to the average intelligence, then the common good becomes a general nuisance, representing the vulgar, conservative materialism at a low level. And by the highest good of the greatest number is chiefly meant the material prosperity of all classes. Skrebensky did not really care about his own material prosperity. If he had been penniless, well, he would have taken his chances. Therefore, how penniless, well, he would have taken his chances. Therefore, how could he find his highest good in giving up his life for the material prosperity of everybody else? What he considered an unimportant thing for himself, he could not think worthy of every sacrifice on behalf of other people. And that which he would consider of the deepest importance to himself as an individual, oh, he said, you mustn't consider the community from that standpoint. No, no, we know what the community wants. It wants something solid. It wants good wages, equal opportunities, good conditions of living. That's what the community wants. It doesn't want anything subtle or difficult. Duty is very plain. Keep in mind the material, the immediate welfare of every man. That's all. So there came over Skrebensky a sort of nullity, which more and more terrified Ursula. She felt there was something hopeless which she had to submit to. She felt a great sense of disaster in pain. She became morbidly sensitive, depressed, apprehensive. It was anguish to her when she saw one rook slowly flapping in the sky. That was a sign of ill omen. And the foreboding became so black and so powerful in her that she was almost extinguished. Yet what was the matter? At worst he was only going away. Why did she mind? What was it she feared? She did not know. Only she had a black dread possessing her. When she went at night and saw the big, flashing stars, they seemed terrible. By day she was always expecting some charge to be made against her. He wrote in March to say that he was going to South Africa in a short time. But before he went, he would snatch a day at the marsh. As if in a painful dream she waited, suspended, unresolved. She did not know, she could not understand. Only she felt that all the threads of her fate were being held taut, in suspense. Her fate were being held taut, in suspense. She only wept sometimes as she went about, saying blindly, "I am so fond of him, I am so fond of him." He came, but why did he come? She looked at him for a sign. He gave no sign. He did not even kiss her. He behaved as if he were an affable, usual acquaintance. This was superficial, but what did it hide? She waited for him. She wanted him to make some sign. So the whole of the day they wavered and avoided contact until evening. Then, laughing, saying he would be back in 6 months' time and would tell them all about it, he shook hands with her mother and took his leave. Ursula accompanied him into the lane. The night was windy. The yew trees seethed and hissed and vibrated. The wind seemed to rush about the chimneys and the church tower. It was dark. The wind...